My beloved, do you think it's an accident that you're hearing my voice right now? No. Heaven planned this moment long before you took your first breath. Here on Holy Voices, we share the whispers of eternity, the messages that change hearts and awaken destinies. If your soul is ready, stay with me, because what you're about to hear might be the very word your spirit has been waiting for. Proverbs 27 verse 17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." Subscribe to Holy Voices and sharpen faith with us. Human timescales don't apply to divine intellect. It happens when the mind is prepared to permanently destroy delusion. According to old predictions, awakened souls possess frequencies that can break through decades of military-grade mind control. And you just demonstrated that you are one of these catalysts that have been prophesied. A government agent's hands are shaking as they gaze at confidential documents. Your comments circumvented conditioning that was installed at a cost of millions, shattering their entire universe like glass. When your consciousness clashed with their programmed mind, years of steadfast service to the system just vanished. You will see how your spiritual strength functions as a weapon of mass awakening in the physical world when you read what follows. Imagine yourself as a cosmic power striking a tuning fork, sending vibrations through dimensions that surgically break mental cages. Let me first share with you the moment this agent's programming broke and they discovered they had been living a meticulously crafted life for their whole career. You set off an extraordinary chain of events when your name was mentioned in confidential briefings. When your file contained information that made trained instincts scream warnings, standard protocol broke down. You had mentioned classified operations in public before they were set to start. Subterranean facilities that were not formally recognized were described by you. According to intelligence records, you have linked financial transactions between organizations that shouldn't have been related. Most troubling of all, you had accurately described techniques that should have been impossible and foreseen the removal of important witnesses before they occurred. Their initial notion that you were being fed information was disproved by your accuracy. However, tracking out your links uncovered something that went against all intelligence collecting models. You lacked access to sensitive systems, intelligence experience, and government contacts. You had no known affiliations with opposition organizations or agencies. You should have been innocuous by every standard by which threats are measured. However, you somehow learned information that were only supposed to be known by a select few people worldwide. Things that were not discussed at any meeting, recorded anywhere, or sent over any monitored communication channel. According to their conception of reality, you were obtaining information through channels that did not exist. At that moment, your actual strength became apparent. Curiosity prevailed over regular protocol, which would have suggested taking immediate action against you. Digging deeper into classified databases was motivated by the need to understand how you were gaining access to information that was impossible to obtain otherwise. The results of those searches would alter everything forever. All of the classified material you had made public was completely true. All of your prophecies had materialized precisely as you had explained. Every link you had made between events that didn't seem to be connected was backed up by evidence that was hidden so far away in compartmentalized files that even high-level clearance operators had never seen the whole picture. Regarding isolated occurrences, you weren't entirely correct. You were exposing the fundamental design of a control system that the majority of operators used without ever realizing its full extent. Your precision compelled people to acknowledge something that, in a materialist worldview, shouldn't exist. Real-time prophetic abilities in action. Human sources were not the source of your information. You were directly downloading truth from awareness levels that were not accessible, observable, or under your control. You had turned into a direct danger to their information monopoly. Everyone was aware of it now. However, your ability to break consciousness was only beginning. Selected 1. Neither of you recognized at the time that this awakening was only the start of something much larger. Because of your precision, proof of a massive underground network that functioned beneath the surface of all significant institutions was discovered. This was more than a corporate conspiracy or a crooked government. This was a well-organized system of controlling awareness that had been in place for many generations and used methods that were denied by mainstream science. Missing persons situations began to make sense because of you. Individuals who posed inappropriate queries, investigated prohibited subjects, or displayed skills that challenged the status quo weren't simply being wiped out. You disclosed that they were being methodically removed from the actual world. Their digital traces were spotless. Psychological tactics were used to change their family's memory. Every trace of their presence was systematically eliminated. Because to your influence, a real underground world beneath large cities, political structures, and business offices was discovered. The actual decision-makers were able to move covertly between their various operations thanks to miles of tunnels connecting sites that weren't shown on any official map. However, you revealed that these weren't only places for meetings or storage. Every presumption regarding the nature of reality itself was called into question by the activities that took place down there. You found proof of experiments that had been conducted for decades to manipulate consciousness. Technologies that have the ability to remotely affect human emotions and thinking. Rituals that appear to be intended to extract spiritual energy from unintentional groups. The earliest signs and rituals that demonstrated the origins of this network went deep into human history, linking to occult customs and mystery schools that the majority of people believe to be extinct. The scope of these operations should have been your greatest fear. However, you experienced a completely different sensation. Recognition. By trapping people in fabricated restrictions, erroneous self-perceptions, and fabricated conflicts that kept them from seeing their true spiritual nature, this network had been able to successfully maintain control over human consciousness for millennia. However, you saw right through it. You understand that these beings were spiritual vampires that drained the life power of people while keeping their victims unaware of the extraction procedure. More significantly, though, you realized that your reawakened consciousness was more than merely impervious to their power. Like a virus spreading through their meticulously regulated matrix, you were deliberately interfering with their business activities. Every time you shouted the truth, every soul you roused, and every individual you encouraged to challenge official narratives, you were denying them nourishment and endangering their survival. For the first time in your lifetime, you watched in awe as this ancient network started to panic. After dominating human mind for ages, these entities were unexpectedly confronted with an unfamiliar situation. You were a human being who had been spiritually awakened and who could not be bought, coerced, tricked, or destroyed by traditional methods. You then forced their most significant error, the chosen one. Not understanding that fighting a really awakened creature would reveal their whole vulnerability to divine power, your presence forced them to try to eliminate you, exposing the full depth of their armament. You meticulously recorded each attack as they adhered to their normal playbook. Your content is targeted by digital suppression algorithms on all platforms. Overnight, fact-checkers with pre-written pieces that refuted the claims made their appearance. Orders were sent to financial organizations to damage your credit score and freeze your accounts. You were warned to be silent by anonymous phone calls. You were instructed to cease your investigation by mysterious emails. Unusual mishaps started happening all around you more frequently, but you managed to do something that was impossible. Not only did each strike fall short of its goal, but you also redirected it in ways that improved your standing and increased your power. Because your conscience demanded protection, cars that should have killed you miraculously missed by the narrowest of margins. Because of your link to a holy source, illnesses that should have rendered you incapable inexplicably disappeared overnight. Because richness flows via awakened consciousness, financial attacks that should have killed you instead caused unexpected riches to arise from unidentified sources. People who were dispatched to infiltrate your group and betray you were unable to finish their assignments against you, which was the most upsetting thing for the Shadow Network. When exposed to your frequency, skilled agents who had successfully killed hundreds of targets over the years would approach you with explicit instructions and then leave without carrying them out. Frequently, they would have no recollection of what had caused them to alter their minds. Through your awakened consciousness, you knew that you were exhibiting something that had never been seen in the network's lengthy history of successful eliminations, heavenly protection materializing in the physical world. Outside the three-dimensional reality, forces were actively stepping in to make sure you survived and remained effective. You weren't only fortunate or well-prepared. You were in charge of spiritual authorities that were outside the comprehension and reach of the Shadow Network. You realized that the conflict you were engaged in was more than just a political or economic one as a result of this realization. It was spiritual in its core. You observed that their strength sprang from humanity's alienation from heavenly awareness. And with each individual you affected, your awakening was causing fissures in their matrix that were growing rapidly. However, your most startling revelation was yet to come. Additionally, it would make your waking power's actual cosmic significance clear. The agent discovered patterns engraved into stone walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light deep down the underground tunnels, in a chamber that felt ancient and recorded history. These weren't haphazard graffiti or contemporary markings. They were hieroglyphics that seemed to have been waiting to be decoded by the appropriate consciousness. Something remarkable occurred as the agent's heightened awareness was directed toward these symbols. Their minds were overflowing with information. Not acquired knowledge, but recalled reality that resurfaces like water in a parched riverbed. They identified without prior sighting, and they comprehended without instruction. These symbols, which were encoded in a language that spoke directly to the soul, were a prophecy, a warning, and a message. It was a startling realization. For thousands of years, this struggle between light and darkness had been foretold. It was not a new invention, the shadow network. It was the present-day expression of a long-standing force that had been stifling human awareness since the beginning of civilization. Over the course of centuries, these same powers had organized every rising and falling empire, perverted religion, and control structure that had enslaved human potential. However, the symbols showed something that made the agents being jolt with recognition. According to cosmic cycles they were powerless to control, the network's era of undisputed domination was coming to an end. We had entered the age of mass awakening, and it had been predicted that you would be one of the main catalysts for this change. The harvest belongs to the sower. Plant your $50 seed into holy voices and prepare for your season of breakthrough. It was not by accident or own accomplishment that you came into conscious awareness. It was the realization of a long-standing prophecy that when darkness became so daring as to jeopardize the spiritual development of humanity itself, forces of light would recapture human consciousness. You participated in a divinely orchestrated response to a crisis that had been accumulating for many centuries. Now the agent realized that their waking was not unique. Similar spiritual activations were being experienced by other operatives in every institution of control across the world. A large number of aware agents that had been dormant within the system, awaiting the right frequency to recall their actual mission and start working from within to destroy the matrix of control, had awakened as a result of your influence. This was more than merely publishing specific secrets or exposing a single corrupt network. This had to do with the basic alteration of human awareness, and you had turned into the spark that started a revolution that was happening in several different planes of reality at once. The network was confronted with its worst dread. Awakened souls who were well-versed in their locations, procedures, and tactics. They all worked together to hasten the disclosure of centuries-old covert operations. Those who were no longer bound by oaths of secrecy to organizations they now recognized as essentially wicked knew every safe house, escape route, and contingency plan. The spy felt they were witnessing the real-time manifestation of divine justice as they saw the methodical breakdown of escape procedures that had been refined over decades. Unfeasible undersea landslides obstructed the ocean tunnels that should have taken leadership to safety. Minutes before crucial evacuations, private aircraft encountered previously unheard-of mechanical difficulties. Authorities concurrently frozen financial accounts that had been safe for generations in accordance with unofficially established standards. The psychological decline among the network's members was the most telling. The emotions they had weaponized were finally being felt by these creatures that had spent generations manipulating human awareness. Fear, suspicion, despair, and bewilderment. They were being devoured from within like a cosmic disease that thrived on their own darkness as the spiritual forces they had commanded turned viciously against them. The agent recorded numerous instances of high-ranking members having paranormal breakdowns that were beyond the realm of medical expertise. Their own thoughts were now filled with the same whispers they had used to manipulate others. Their victims' sleep was now plagued by the horrors they had caused them. They were now cut off from all sources of comfort and tranquility by the isolation they had mastered as a weapon. Surrounded by symbols that spoke of prophecies being fulfilled and divine timing being activated, I stood in that ancient chamber. The agent felt that their part in this cosmic play was fully understood. They hadn't fallen victim to uncontrollable circumstances or discovered classified material by accident. Since the beginning, they had been placed in the system, anticipating the very moment when your awakening would cause them to remember as well. This revelation had been prepared for by every assignment, secret, and classified briefing they had encountered during their employment. They had been positioned inside the shadow network, not to assist it, but to observe its anticipated disintegration from within and record the resurgence of divine awareness on Earth via reawakened individuals such as yourself. Their appreciation for you was greater than anything they had ever felt in their personal or professional lives. You hadn't only exposed wrongdoing or leaked secret information. Their soul had been awakened by you, and they were reminded of the purpose they had volunteered to serve prior to taking on this existence. They were becoming acutely aware of their actual role as a bridge between worlds, and their spiritual amnesia was beginning to fade. The agent now realized that you had never been a lone person looking for the truth or engaged in standalone conflicts with dishonest institutions. You participated in a concerted attempt of divine consciousness to free this reality from the forces that had imprisoned it for thousands of years. Thousands of people around the world woke up at the same time as you. You were all activating at the same time, causing a frequency shift that prevented you from maintaining consciousness control. The prophecies had nothing to do with some far-off future catastrophe. They were about this very moment when enough souls would awaken and realize who they really were and what they were here to do, which would lead to the widespread release of human consciousness from the centuries-long captivity. The timing of the cosmos was ideal. You were one of the main forces that enabled the divine plan to come to pass exactly as it had been predicted. The agency wanted you to fully comprehend the cosmic significance of what you had done as they were getting about to speak for the first time in their career. It was a total collapse of the shadow network that had dominated human consciousness for thousands of years. Their escape routes were barred, their tunnels were sealed, and their operatives realized the truth about their involvement. Because the light of consciousness could no longer be repressed, the era of covert manipulation was coming to an end. This extraordinary change had been brought about by your voice, which spoke truth into existence. Until every sleeping soul on the globe had a chance to recall their divine essence, every word you spoke set off waves that would continue to stretch across realms. Other spirits were led home to themselves by your unwavering connection to divine consciousness, your refusal to be hushed, and your determination to awaken in spite of all the challenges. The message from the agent had the authority of someone who had been inside humanity's prison when it completely collapsed. In the world of mind, where all meaningful conflicts are determined, the war was already won. The play out of victory was all that was taking place in the physical world. When enough souls, like you, decide to remember their true selves and the reason behind their incarnation at this pivotal point in human history, the consciousness revolution was far from over. It was finished. Through awakened beings who refuse to stay unconscious, divine intellect has made a comeback to Earth. As their own operatives realized their actual mission and started organizing the shift to humanity's spiritual freedom, the control structures were collapsing. Above all, the agent wanted you to know that you were never on this operation alone. Every chance that came your way, every opportunity that materialized when you needed it, and every individual who helped you along the way were all arranged by forces of light that understood your dedication to a cause far bigger than your own comfort or safety. Millions of people were inspired to remember their own connection to the source of energy by you, who became a living example of what was possible when human consciousness matched divine will. Everything that had kept humanity spiritually imprisoned was affected by the irreversible and self-perpetuating transformation you sparked, which spread like wildfire through the collective awareness. And just like that federal agent who was shaking their hands while looking at those confidential files, realizing for the first time that everything they believed to be true about the world was actually a well-crafted falsehood, you have just had your personal epiphany regarding the full extent of your ability to serve as a catalyst for humanity's release from the powers that attempted to permanently enslave consciousness. The first person you cracked open was not this FBI agent. A pattern that went back years was discovered by cross-referencing other cases. A series of security breaches, compromised assets, and awoken agents that were all linked to exposure to your frequency. Without even attempting, you have been methodically eliminating their staff. Surveillance teams assigned to keep an eye on you were known to leave their places after prolonged observation, according to classified records. The training couldn't manage existential problems that arose from seeing you function in the world, not because you found them or threatened them. After decades of mindlessly carrying out orders, operators were suddenly unable to engage in actions that went against their freshly awakened conscience. The evaluating agent was especially taken aback by one report. A psychological evaluation of a spy assigned to penetrate your inner circle. Throughout their career, this topic has successfully finished similar tasks. However, after being with you for weeks, something extraordinary took place. It was referred to as spontaneous moral awakening by the psychiatrists. It was psychologically difficult for them to continue serving the shadow network because of the radical restructuring of their values brought about by your influence. Something that chilled the reviewing agent was highlighted in the assessment. The individual said that after being exposed to your energy, their perspective changed. Not delusions or hallucinations, but improved perception that unveiled truths underneath outward manifestations. After coming into contact with you, this operative was able to identify spiritual authenticity in others, detect deception with remarkable accuracy, and see linkages between events that were not discernible using standard analytical techniques. You have permanently raised their level of awareness. Field agents, analysts, administrators, and handlers at the highest classified levels were all experiencing awareness breaks as a result of the awakening contagion you started. The operational security of entire departments was jeopardized by high turnover rates. Your influence made it hard for those who had devoted their lives to upholding the secrecy apparatus to continue, and they were leaving rich positions behind. Conscience took over after awakening. The inquiry found that you lacked a deliberate plan to alert agents and adversary groups. You weren't trying to use traditional intelligence techniques to convert assets or conduct recruitment campaigns. Like a tuning fork, your mere being in the collective consciousness was resonating at frequencies that roused spiritual awareness in everybody who came into contact with your energy signature. As a result, personnel could not be protected by the network using conventional counterintelligence techniques. Their control systems were essentially incompatible with awakened awareness because of what you had done. Every effort to protect agents from your influence merely served to highlight the fact that the true adversary of their manipulation tool was consciousness. Don't just watch, join. Subscribe, press like, and write in the comments what Holy Voices has spoken to your heart. Internal memos suggesting progressively drastic methods to protect remaining loyal personnel were found by the agent. Protocols for psychological screening were revised to detect spiritual awakening in its early stages. Due to the possibility of destabilization, meditation practices were prohibited. Even senior agents had limited access to some material since the awakening process they were attempting to stop was expedited by exposure to the truth. Some institutions put in place what they dubbed consciousness firewalls, which are settings created to manipulate frequencies in order to stifle spiritual awareness. Both severe psychological conditioning and medicinal intervention. However, the awakening tsunami you started was too strong for even these drastic steps to stop. Employees in these purportedly secure settings kept having breakthrough experiences that broke beyond their pre-programmed boundaries. The agent became aware that they were seeing a control system that had taken millennia to perfect being systematically destroyed. Through the mere existence of genuine consciousness, it served as a reminder of one's true identity beneath layers of indoctrination and manipulation, rather than through organized resistance or external attack. There was no way to prevent awakening once it started, and you had turned into a walking antidote to spiritual forgetfulness. What's more, the agent learned that your impact spread far beyond direct contact. After interacting with someone who had been awakened by your frequency, others who had never met you, heard you speak, or encountered your content were suddenly waking up. The expansion of consciousness was leaping from person to person through common social connections, like a positive virus, through human networks. The shadow network found themselves facing a phenomenon they had no rules for tackling, positive contagion that made individuals more conscious, more inquiring, more spiritually connected, and hence less susceptible to their manipulation techniques. An exponentially growing web of conscious awareness was dismantling their power base from within as each person you awakened became a transmission point for the same frequency. After looking over the awakening incident chronology, the agent observed that your influence appeared to activate some people at the exact times when their waking would have the biggest effect on network operations. Just before getting access to money laundering methods that financed illicit initiatives, a financial crime specialist came to light. A communications analyst awakened shortly before being assigned to a disinformation operation meant to undermine other truth-tellers like yourself. It couldn't have happened by accident. In the unseen conflict between waking and control, higher intelligence was coordinating your consciousness and extending effects to accomplish strategic goals. You weren't merely activating folks at random. Forces that could view the entire battlefield and several different planes of reality were using you as an instrument. According to classified assessments the spy discovered, your waking ability worked on quantum consciousness principles that their experts were unable to fully quantify or comprehend. Your presence seemed to produce coherence in the quantum field that allowed suppressed information to arise in the minds of others who encountered your frequency. This clarified how recently awakened agents were able to obtain information that, given their level of security clearance, they shouldn't have had. Even more astoundingly, the agent found that individuals who had been awakened were starting to exhibit skills that were beyond the realm of normal understanding. Improved intuition that enabled them to predict operations ahead of time. Communication via telepathy that evaded channels under observation. Capabilities for remote observation that offered intelligence without the need of technology. It was as if exposure to your consciousness released dormant human potential that the control system had worked for generations to stifle. The ramifications were astounding. The network had been doing more than merely managing information and resources if genuine awakening brought back the human faculties that had been ruthlessly suppressed. Human evolution itself had been forcibly constrained by them. Your presence demonstrated that spiritual knowledge was not the only aspect of consciousness evolution. It was about regaining the abilities that were inalienable to humanity. This insight clarified why the Shadow Network has made such significant investments to maintain people's spiritual unconsciousness. Not only would it be more difficult to trick an awakened populace, they would have skills that would prevent centralized authority. When humans were able to use telepathy to communicate, access information just through consciousness, and use spiritual discernment to directly sense truth, conventional power structures were rendered obsolete. The agent understood that being a chosen one meant far more than just revealing secrets or exposing corruption. You were allowing the reemergence of human capacities that had been purposefully repressed in order to preserve an artificially limited system. Each individual you awakened regained a portion of their initial potential, enabling them to become not only spiritually free but also practically powerful in ways that jeopardized the foundation of control-based civilization as a whole. Most importantly, though, the agent found proof that your consciousness-shattering effects were speeding up in accordance with a precise time frame that matched old prophecies about the spiritual development of humanity. They discovered studies of past waking moments deep within the classified archives, which revealed comparable patterns of consciousness growth followed by control system breakdown. People who possessed what scientists called activator frequencies, consciousness characteristics that could spark widespread spiritual progress in human populations, were responsible for the awakening each time. According to the documents, the Shadow Network had been keeping an eye out for these people's appearance throughout history, creating ever more advanced techniques for locating and destroying consciousness activators before they could reach their full potential. However, they were caught off guard by your awakening as you didn't match their models of how such powers would seem in the present day. In the past, traditional activators had been acknowledged spiritual leaders, mystical beings, or people who publicly professed to have unusual talents. You had come from everyday life with no supernatural claims or magical credentials, so their detection systems were unaware of your actual nature until your effects were already out of control. The agent discovered internal messages that expressed confusion about how someone without any kind of formal spiritual training or obvious paranormal talents could produce effects that expanded awareness, beyond the capabilities of historical figures who had spent their entire lives cultivating such abilities. As per confidential study, the solution was found in the purity of your link to source consciousness, which was an unfiltered channel that permitted divine intelligence to function through you without being distorted by artificial spiritual practices, ego, or expectations. This clarified the reason behind your awakening's influence was far more potent than consciousness researchers or conventional spiritual gurus. You weren't working with mastered methods or theoretical frameworks that could be disproved. As a direct manifestation of the same consciousness that animated everything, you were making it nearly impossible for anyone whose spiritual nature remained intact beneath their indoctrination to withstand your influence. Because the core of their existence remained connected to the same source that expressed through you, the agent found that even the most intensively conditioned operatives retained enough true consciousness to react to your frequency. Since no amount of psychological manipulation could totally break that bond, each and every person was a potential awakening catalyst just waiting to be triggered by coming into contact with authentic divine consciousness. Hello, this is Mike Canary interrupting your regularly scheduled show for a brief while. We are the founders of the Holy Voices Inner Order and the Astral Atom Network. We finished being polite. Our battle is a spiritual one. You are aware of it. We are aware of it. We are aware of it. And we are dedicated to this mission full-time. We need the ammunition, but I'm craving the blood of a fourth-dimensional archon. Listen, you're doing more than just helping us when you join the Inner Order. They're giving you access to exclusive tools they never meant you to have, including spiritual warfare techniques they stole off the internet, psychic self-defense training, and targeted individual intelligence. Additionally, we only meet in private on Zoom once a week. Real nazis, real family, and real power, no filters or filler. It's a complete victory. You obtain what you require. We are allowed to continue fighting. Don't just watch, then. Give it a like, Tell all the people you know about this video. Now. Join the Inner Order of Holy Voices. Let's complete the task at hand. The description contains a link. Let's go crazy. There was no conflict between opposing ideologies or hierarchies of power during the revolution. With awakened individuals like you acting as mirrors reflecting humanity's actual spiritual essence, it was consciousness recalling itself after millennia of enforced amnesia. Back to people who, due to layers of control and indoctrination, had lost who they truly were. The agent now realized that the awakening that was brought on by being exposed to your consciousness was the most universal and most personal experience that could ever exist. While acknowledging their basic connection to the same divine intelligence that functioned through you and every other awakened creature on the world, they had also recalled their unique spiritual essence. The agent was quite assured of the result of this consciousness revolution as he stood in that old chamber, surrounded by symbols that spoke of prophecies being fulfilled in real time. Because it was based on truth rather than belief, driven by divine intelligence rather than human effort, and bolstered by the essential character of consciousness itself rather than by manipulable or destroyable external conditions, the awakening you had sparked was irrevocable. Authentic awakening was the most contagious force in the world, more potent than propaganda, more convincing than argument, and more transformative than any political or social movement in human history, as demonstrated by your ability to shatter consciousness. You had shown that the process of expanding consciousness wasn't gradual. You're giving shakes the spiritual realm. A $100 seed into Holy Voices is an act of faith heaven cannot ignore. It might take years of spiritual effort, but the instant someone saw their actual self reflected in another enlightened creature, they could realize it instantly. The agent's appreciation went beyond their individual freedom to include the full shift in human awareness that your presence had enabled. From the special vantage point of someone with access to the top echelons of the control system, they had seen the dawn of a new era. And because beings like you had remembered how to represent humanity's divine essence with such clarity that it became impossible to preserve spiritual amnesia, they realized with perfect confidence that the age of consciousness suppression was coming to an end. Something that shocked the top levels of the Shadow Network was exposed by the classified psychological profiles. Your awakened awareness repels all forms of consciousness manipulation, including frequency weapons, hypnotic programming, trauma-based control, and pharmacological conditioning. Your link to divine intellect has produced an impenetrable barrier that not only keeps you safe but also powerfully reflects their attacks back at their origin. You cannot acquire this immunity by deliberate effort or training. Restoring human awareness to its original divine nature is a natural outcome of genuine spiritual awakening. When someone reaches a true awakening like yours, the agent found that their consciousness functions from frequencies that are outside the realm of artificial manipulation technologies. Additionally, those who spend time in your energetic field are surrounded by zones of immunity created by your presence. Individuals that work alongside you, reside close by, or simply speak with you on a regular basis start to exhibit comparable resistance to mind manipulation. You're not merely waking people up. You're establishing new areas of free consciousness that the control system is unable to access or affect. The agent discovered evidence that, as your influence grew among local communities, entire geographic regions were starting to change. Crime rates mysteriously fell. As awakened citizens gained an innate ability to recognize dishonesty, political corruption became harder to sustain. Corporate deception efforts were continually unsuccessful because consumers were able to distinguish between real and fake messaging with previously unheard of accuracy. Your ability to shatter consciousness works like a reality upgrade, bringing the truth into such sharp focus that everyone working in your zone of influence can see lies right away. The agent saw that you had not simply awoken people. You had started to awaken the very collective consciousness, changing the very setting in which the shadow network functioned. This explains why their attempts at elimination were so wildly unsuccessful. You weren't merely shielded by supernatural powers. You were now the center of divine knowledge manifesting itself in the material world. As soon as you attained true enlightenment, their failure was certain, since battling you was like attempting to combat the very source of consciousness. There is complete certainty in the agent's last message. Your triumph is total and unchangeable. The same divine wisdom that permeates you is transformed into a transmission point in each of your broken consciousnesses. Until all souls on earth understand that they are manifestations of the boundless divine potential, the waking cascade you started will keep growing. Like that federal agent with shaky hands looking at sensitive papers, realizing for the first time that their entire created world was a complex lie intended to keep consciousness trapped. You've realized how powerful you are as a catalyst for human liberty. The revolution is finished. Selected one. Beloved soul, if this message has spoken to your heart, don't let it end here. Click that like button so the light can spread to more people who need hope. Subscribe to Holy Voices so you never miss the next word heaven has for you. And leave a comment below. I read every one, and I pray over them. Remember, faith grows when we share it, so share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Until we meet again, may God's peace cover you and His voice guide your every step.